Welcome to part 2 of the most common eye drawing mistakes series, where I'm sharing how to fix or avoid the most common mistakes I see that decrease the realism and believability of an eye drawing. So, if your eye drawings look more like this than this, you're in the right place. If you have not watched part 1 of this series, I suggest you start there. There's a link to it in the description box below. If you have, let's dive into most common eye drawing mistake 3. Mistake 3. Drawing details before establishing a value structure. There are so many seductive details in an eye that we all want to dive into. I want to draw eyelashes, eyebrows, and the beautiful radiating fibers of an iris as much as the next person. But the order in which we add information to a drawing is really important. Adding detail too early can actually lead to an unrealistic drawing, because details alone will not make your drawing look realistic. Details are like the icing on the cake. Without the actual cake, there's nowhere for the icing to go. We bake the cake first, and then we ice it. It might be a strange comparison, but it's very similar with the details of an eye. We must draw the larger forms and structures first before adding detail on top. One of the structures we must create before adding detail is called a value structure. Value structure refers to where the light, halftone, and dark areas are on your subject. So imagine drawing this eye using only 3 values: a light value, a middle value, and a dark value. The result is almost a posterized version of the eye. While this might seem overly simplistic, it's essential that you learn to simplify the values of your subject. Here's why. To draw a realistic image, we must mimic the value relationships that appear on the subject. So the light values need to be light enough. The dark values need to be dark enough. And the middle values or halftones need to be distinctly in between the two, so lighter than the dark values and darker than the light values. Within each of these groups, there will eventually be a range of values, right? When we start adding additional values, though, they have to remain within their assigned group. So all of my halftone values, no matter how many there are, must be lighter than my dark values and darker than my light values. If they're not, our drawing will look unrealistic because we haven't accurately drawn the value relationships that appear on the subject. Here's an example of this. This is a self-portrait that I drew, I think, back in junior high. Looking more specifically here, would you say that this area is in light or in shadow? It's kind of ambiguous, right? To me, it looks like this should probably have been a shadow shape. There may have been some reflected light in this area that was lightening part of the shadow, but even if that were the case, reflected light is a shadow element. We see reflected light in the shadows, so we need to make sure when drawing reflected light that it's darker than the halftones in our image. Otherwise, this happens. This does not read as a clear, convincing shadow because it's not dark enough and it's not consistent enough. Can you see how many values there are within this shadow shape? Notice that there are spots within the shadow that are just as light as the lightest areas in this drawing. Ultimately, there's no clear organization of light, halftone, and dark, and this is greatly decreasing the realism of this drawing. If we compare it to my more recent eye drawings, can you tell what's light, halftone, and dark value in these drawings? It's very clear, right? To create a realistic drawing of an eye or anything else, we must separate what's in light, halftone, and dark. We can avoid this common mistake by creating a value structure early on in the shading process. Look at the first 2 steps of my shading process here. Even though the values are all very light, you can already start to tell what's going to be light value, halftone, and shadow value. I start creating the value structure as soon as I start shading, and it's carried through the entire shading process. Notice also that I don't add details like eyelashes until the very end of the shading process. Remember, detail is the icing on the cake. To start creating a value structure, you first need to learn to see it. To see your subject as those three values: light, halftone, and shadow. To do that, we're going to squint at our subject. So actually half close our eyes while observing the subject or photo reference that you're drawing from. We squint because it heightens the contrast of the image, and it blurs together detail, making it easier to see and group together the light, halftone, and shadow areas. So, squint at your subject and ask yourself, how would I draw this subject using only three values? Start by determining the two extremes. Where are the darkest values on the subject? Where are the lightest values on the subject? The remaining values are usually the halftones. Once you can see the three value groups, return to your drawing and check. Does it reflect the value structure that you're seeing on the subject? Are your dark values dark enough and in the right place? Are your light values light enough and in the right place? Do you have true middle values that are lighter than your dark values and darker than your light values? And are your halftones in the right place? This is an essential mode of seeing to master to shade eyes or anything else realistically. For more guidance on this essential skill, you can take my eye drawing intensive, where you'll learn to shade realistic, believable, stunning eyes. There's a link to it in the description box below. While we're here, my name's Marina. I'm a professional visual artist and founder of thedrawingsource.com, which is dedicated to helping you achieve new levels of realism in your drawings. Mistake 4 is leaving the white of the eye completely white. The anatomical name for this part of the eye is the sclera, and it's a layer of dense connective tissue that makes up the outer coating of most of the eyeball. Of course, we only see the part of the sclera that's between the eyelids. Because it's commonly known as the white of the eye, leaving it white is an easy mistake to make, especially when first learning how to draw eyes. However, the sclera is almost never completely white, and drawing it that way could be making your eye drawings look very flat and two-dimensional. If you're wondering, what do you mean the white of the eye isn't white? Consider this. The eyeball is a ball, a sphere. What happens when we illuminate a sphere? The fall of light creates a range of values, or shades of gray. These gradually darkening shades of gray create the illusion of three-dimensionality. Because the eyeball is a sphere, we see the same thing within the sclera. It's much lighter here, and then we can see it gradually darkening and falling into shadow. There will also often be reflections or highlights in the sclera that are lighter than the rest of the sclera. Let's look at some examples. Though the sclera here may appear white at first, look at this highlight. Can you see that it's lighter than the rest of the sclera? That's our first sign that the sclera is not completely white. Think of it this way. How would we make this highlight show up in our drawing? By darkening the surrounding area. By making sure that the sclera around the highlight is darker than the highlight. Now, look how close in value the reflection and the sclera are. Both are very light. This is a very subtle value change. Drawing light values or becoming light-handed is a skill that needs to be developed. In case you struggle with this, I have a video with 3 effective tips for drawing light values. I'll link to it in the description box below. So we can leave the highlight as the white of the paper if we are drawing on white paper, and the surrounding values will need to be a little bit darker. What other value variations can we see within this sclera? Look at this shadow cast from the eyelashes onto the sclera. Also, there are subtle gradations that darken towards both corners of the eye. Notice that the lightest part of the sclera is here, on the outside of the lower half of the iris. Then the value darkens to the left, towards the lower eyelid, and to the right. The value is darker at this end of the sclera than this end of the sclera. How about this slightly darker ring to the right of the iris? In other cases, depending on the lighting, part of the sclera could be in shadow, as it is here. The entire right half is in shadow. This shadow is not a single flat value though, not even close. Notice the gradations and value differences within this shadow area. There's a slightly lighter shape, surrounded by a darker shape. Within just the darker shape, the darkest portion is probably just to the right of the iris. Then it lightens somewhat, and darkens again towards the corner of the eye. In the left lighter portion, again we can see that the sclera is not white because these reflections are lighter than the rest of this light portion of the sclera. To make them show up in a drawing, the sclera surrounding them will need to be darker than they are. Look at these beautiful shadows being cast by the eyelashes onto the eyeball. Gorgeous, right? How fun to draw. And notice the slightly darker sclera to the left of the iris. Then it lightens slightly and darkens again towards the inner corner of the eye. So, even when the sclera appears white at first glance, upon close observation, you'll usually find differences in value. To avoid this common mistake, we must carefully observe the sclera, looking for gradations, shadows, and reflections. The next time you're drawing the sclera, use the following questions to supercharge your observation. Where is the lightest part of the eye? Where is the lightest part of the sclera? What does this tell you about the value of the sclera? For example, here the lightest part of the eye is probably the center of this reflection. The lightest part of the sclera is to the left of the iris. When I compare the two, I think the value of the reflection here is lighter than the lightest part of the sclera. This tells me that when I draw this eye, I can leave this value as the white of the paper and make sure to draw the entire sclera a little bit darker. None of the sclera will remain as the white of the paper. Or in this case, the lightest parts of the eye are these reflections, some of which are in the sclera. This tells me that aside from these highlights, the rest of the sclera will be darker than this value. Only these highlights will be left as the white of the paper, if I'm drawing on white paper, of course. Where's the darkest part of the sclera? Where are the gradations in the sclera? And are there any shadows being cast onto the sclera? Here, the darkest part of the sclera is probably in this outer corner of the eye, though this is a close second. Are there gradations? Absolutely. Look at the gradual darkening from the lightest part of the sclera to here. And then there's a value jump right in the corner, where the sclera is considerably darker. On the right side, there's a lighter shape of the sclera here, and then it darkens towards the right. Notice this shadow being cast onto the sclera. These are the kinds of nuances that we need to notice to infuse our eye drawings with realism. Often to dramatically improve your eye drawings, you just need someone like me to point these things out to you, to show you what to look for and what questions to ask yourself to guide your observation. That's exactly what we do in my eye drawing intensive, my online course all about drawing realistic, believable eyes. There's a self-study option and an option to work with me one-on-one if you're looking for that level of support. There's a link to the course in the description box below. If this lesson resonated with you, I invite you to check it out. If you missed part 1 of this video, definitely go back and watch that, and part 3 is on its way next week. Subscribe to this channel below to be notified when it's uploaded. In the meantime, you might also be interested in my video on how to transform your eye drawings. In it, I share how my student Vered made this tremendous progress in only 4 weeks, and how you can too. There's a link to the video in the description box below, and I will see you there.